In recent years, there has been a surge of interest in traditional archery and bow hunting, with guys like Aaron Snyder, Greg from THP, Fred Eichler, and a bunch of others either going full tilt trad or at least showing some interest on their social media platforms. The interest in traditional archery and hunting with traditional equipment is on the rise. This video is going to be an attempt to answer some of the questions that those new to traditional archery might have. We're going to focus on the similarities and the real differences between traditional archery and compound, and we're going to talk about everything from the cost of getting into it to the fundamentals of shooting and the efficiency of the weapons. There is a lot to unpack here, so stick around. So let's start with a discussion on proficiency. How long does it take you to become proficient with these two types of bows? Compound on one hand, traditional bows on the other hand. So there's some fundamental differences between compound bows and traditional bows that lead to varying lengths of time that it's going to take you to become proficient with these weapons. With a compound, everything, the entire bow and everything that you can put on the bow is designed to take the archer out of the equation as much as possible and make it difficult for the archer to mess up the shot. Things like drop away rests, sights, stabilizers, release aids, all of these things, that is their sole function, is to keep you from messing up the shot. Now you take a bare bow, a traditional bare bow on the other hand, and it gives you, there's none of that stuff. It gives you every opportunity to mess up the shot, and so you have to learn how to control for all those factors. You don't have those things to do that for you. So with all of the aids that are available for a compound shooter, I would say the average person, given a few hours, can become proficient with those weapons. Now granted, you're probably not going to be hitting the 10 ring at 80 yards within a few hours, but you should be able to keep it within the kill zone of a deer-sized target within just a few hours with a compound that's set up right. A traditional bow, on the other hand, is going to take much longer by comparison, but I don't think it's going to take as long as a lot of people think it should. Now, one of the things that I hear over and over and over again is that it takes years, and to that I say BS. It doesn't have to. The reason that that idea is so prevalent is because a lot of people just insist on making things difficult on themselves, as though shooting a traditional bow isn't difficult enough. I respect anyone's decision to shoot their bow the way they want to, whether it's aiming, instinctive, 3-under, split finger, or behind your back. It does not make a difference to me. But there is a deeply ingrained tradition of instinctive shooting in traditional archery, and there are some people who will look down on you if you don't adhere to that. But for those who are just getting into traditional archery, there's a much easier way to do things. I would recommend starting with some kind of aiming method such as gap shooting, and then later on, if you want to, moving into instinctive. Another thing that's going to help immensely is using some kind of psychological trigger, and for those of you who have seen some of my videos in the past, have seen me using a clicker, that is a great way to do it. I would say that shot anticipation and inputs into your shot either just before or during the shot is one of the leading frustration for all traditional shooters. I don't care if you've been shooting for 2 days or 50 years. Shot anticipation is a major hurdle for a lot of people to overcome. What I mean by shot anticipation is that when you come back to full draw, you are anticipating the release of that arrow, and a lot of times you'll flinch a little bit. That will cause all kinds of variations in your shot, and it can be very difficult to overcome. So there are some great online resources that can explain this entire concept much better than I can, and one of them that I'll refer you to is Joel Turner or Shot IQ. They have an online course, and another one is the Solid Archery Mechanics by Tom Clum Sr., and that's available on the Push website. All of those things I'm going to link to in the video description down below. All right, so how long should it take you to become proficient with a traditional bow? I would say if you approach traditional archery with the right mindset and a willingness to learn, you should be able to keep it in a 6-inch group at 15 to 20 yards within just a few weeks. Now with that said, there's nothing easy about traditional archery. If it was easy, compound bows wouldn't exist. All right, let's talk a little bit about shot distance. I feel like this is one of the primary concerns of guys that are currently hunting with a compound but are thinking about getting into trad. I was hunting elk with a friend of mine, Brad Brooks, who is a compound shooter and a very good shot. And I was telling him about this bull that kept giving me the slip. And so I'd been chasing this bull all morning long and just couldn't quite cut the distance to what I needed it. And there was one time in particular where this bull was standing on a hill just a little bit above me in the open, broadside at 70 yards. And for me, knowing my limitations and the limitations of my weapons, there's no shot there. That bull may as well be on the moon. But when I was talking to Brad about this, he was saying, I would have taken that shot and I'd be packing elk meat right now. And after seeing Brad shoot, there's no doubt in my mind that that is the absolute truth. Now there are a few notable exceptions, but most traditional shooters just aren't going to be able to make those longer shots reliably. Now your own personal maximum effective range is obviously going to depend on your skill, but it's also going to depend on the type of animal that you're hunting. So in the interest of providing you with a concrete example where you can really understand the differences between a traditional bow and a compound bow, I'll just use myself as an example. So this deer target, this is a life-size deer target. I can stand back here at 25 yards or 30 yards, and with my traditional setup, I can put arrows into the kill zone on this thing all day long. With a compound, I could probably, it's been a long time since I've shot a compound, but I would guess that I could do that same thing at 70 and maybe even 80 yards. When you decide to make the commitment to hunt with a traditional bow, there are going to be times, and probably lots of times, when you have animals that are within compound range that there's no shot with a traditional bow. You're just going to have to let that animal walk away. And that's just too much for some people. But if you can get there, if you're willing to do that, there are a lot of benefits to that. On the upside, you get to watch those animals. And when you get to watch those animals doing the things that animals do, you learn from those animals and you add a little bit to your woodsmanship, your knowledge of that animal and how they behave. And when you do that, you're able to take that knowledge and apply it to every single hunt that comes afterwards. All right, so let's talk a little bit about holding these bows at full draw, because this is something, when it comes to bow hunting and waiting for the perfect shot opportunity, this is something that is a major benefit of a compound over a recurve or a longbow, because you can hold a compound for so long. But you can hold a traditional bow at full draw, and I've done that many times when I have animals coming in. So I do a lot of hunting on the ground, and so being able to draw these bows when an animal goes behind a tree and waiting for that animal to come out is important for the type of hunting that I'm doing. It's probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was filming a friend of mine and we were elk hunting, and we had a couple of cow elk come in, and it was only like a 10-yard shot, but this cow was coming in, and when she went behind the tree, he drew his bow, and he's a pretty big guy. He's shooting a 65-pound longbow. And when he drew, this cow stopped behind the tree, and she stood there for, I think it was 35 seconds before she decided to come on through his shooting lane. And he made a perfect shot on her right behind the shoulder. She went 10 yards and fell over. But that just goes to show you that you can hold these bows. You know, you're not going to be able to hold them for 2 or 3 minutes like you can with a high let-off compound, but you can hold these bows at full draw and wait on those shots. Now, in order to do that, you're going to have to really focus on your back tension. When you get good structural, bone-on-bone structural alignment, it's almost like a let-off, because your bones are being compressed or trying to be compressed, and it's much easier to hold these bows at full draw. So that's something you're definitely going to be able to, or going to need to watch. Now, one of the great benefits of a traditional bow versus a compound bow, especially for the backpack hunters or the guys that are going way into the backcountry, is the physical weight of these bows. I don't know what this bow weighs, but it's 1.5 pounds, maybe 2 pounds. I should weigh that and see. I've never weighed one of my bows, the actual physical weight of the bow. But they're easy to carry. You can take the string off of it. A lot of the bows that you're going to get are 2-piece. You can just pop them apart, stick them in your backpack. Another benefit is they're just the simplicity of the weapon. I always carry an extra string with me. I've never had anything go wrong on a hunt, luckily, with my string. I've never cut one or had one damaged where I felt like I needed to replace it, but I always carry an extra string with me. And if something happened in the woods, all I'd have to do is pull that string out and just put another one on. With a compound, you're just not going to be able to do that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the cost of getting into these two types of archery, compound and traditional archery. When I started doing the research on to get the information I needed for this video, I was really surprised at how expensive a new compound bow is. And you know, you can find old compounds for dirt cheap. You can find old recurves and longbows for dirt cheap. And so, you know, it doesn't really do any good to compare like the cheapest bows you can find. And so as simply as a comparison, I'm gonna go with top of the line bows. Now, with that said, I don't think that if you're just getting into archery, whether it's compound or traditional, I don't think that you need to go with a top of the line, but this is simply for comparison's sake. But if you look at new bows, new compound bows, the base cost of a new compound bow is going to be somewhere between $1,000 and $1,200. That's just the bow. Then you have your sights, your rests, your releases, your stabilizers, and all the other stuff, all the other accessories that you need to make that bow function. And so to get a good compound set up, ready to hunt, you know, you could be looking at anywhere between $1,500 and $2,000. Now, you could get a very nice custom-made longbow or recurve for that amount of money, like a very nice one. And so the entry-level cost of getting into compound and traditional archery for top-of-the-line stuff is pretty much the same. But the big difference is how these two types of bows hold their value. So you could take a 5-year-old compound bow, and if you paid $1,000 for it 5 years ago, you might be able to get $300 for it today. Now, if you take a nice custom-made longbow or recurve, you know, you could pay $1,000 for it 5 years ago, and it's going to be worth, if you've taken care of it, it's going to be worth $1,000 today. It may be even worth more than that. And so in the long run, a custom-made traditional bow is really more of an investment. I want to reemphasize that the numbers I'm throwing out here, this is reflecting high-end hunting bows, and this is simply as a standard for comparison of compound and traditional archery. You do not have to spend $1,000 or $1,200 on a really nice custom bow to get into traditional archery. In fact, I would kind of warn you against that until you really kind of know what you're looking for. You can spend, you know, $300, $400, $500, $600 and get a pretty nice factory bow that's going to serve you very well. There's nothing wrong with those bows. Three Rivers has got a ton of them to choose from. And if you can't afford that, you can oftentimes find some of the older production bows for, you know, in the price range of $150, $200. Or you can go with something like a Samick Sage, which I've never personally shot, but I'm sure it would be fine just to get you into archery. Once you start figuring things out, then you'll have a better idea of what you are looking for in a nicer bow. The biggest recommendation that I can tell you, and I get asked all the time for recommendations on bows. What bow should I get? And I can't really tell you, because 98% of my time in traditional archery has been spent shooting the bows that I make. And so I don't have a lot of experience with a broad range of other manufacturers' bows. The biggest advice that I could tell you is just don't get something that's too heavy for you. Get something that you can draw and hold very, very comfortably, because you do not want to be struggling against that bow as you're trying to learn form and learn how to shoot these things. I think that's a major problem for new people getting into bows, is they overestimate how much weight they can draw and shoot accurately. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Aerospeed, because this is one area where there's a vast difference between traditional bows and compound bows. Now, any of the new compounds on the market today are going to be very, very fast. We're talking speeds of 300 plus feet per second. That's with their AMO standard. Now, compared to a traditional bow, like a really nice custom longbow or recurve is going to be shooting little over 200 feet per second maybe. The bows that I make and shoot are under 200 feet per second. So for my bows, a very fast one would be 180 feet per second. Now with that said, I have shot clean through multiple big animals like elk because I put a lot of emphasis on the tuning of my arrows, the weight of my arrows, how sharp my broadheads are, and all of that stuff. The speed of the arrow doesn't really factor as much into penetration as a lot of people want to make it out to be. What speed does for you is create a flatter trajectory, and so it makes aiming at varying distances much easier. And so what that boils down to is the range estimation, especially at those longer distances. The range estimation with a traditional bow that's going to be shooting slower is much more critical than it is with a compound. With a compound that's shooting a really flat trajectory, got a light arrow, flat trajectory, fast speeds, you can afford to mess up the range estimation a little bit because your trajectory is so low. With a slower shooting longbow or recurve, your trajectory is much more pronounced, or your arc is much more pronounced. And so your distance estimation, especially at those longer distances, has to be spot on. This is one of the reasons why it's difficult to shoot these bows at longer distances. All right guys, that's gonna do it for this video. If you've got questions, just put them in the comments and I'll try to get to them, try to answer them as best I can. Also, you can call Three Rivers. They've got a staff there that's ready to take your calls, answer your questions about any kind of gear recommendations that you might be looking for. With that, I'd like to thank everybody that's signed up for Patreon that helps support these videos. And good luck this hunting season. If you are thinking about getting into traditional archery and you've been hesitating a little bit, just jump in, man. There is, it's a great community to be involved in. There's great people. It's a ton of fun. You are going to give up some opportunities to put meat in the freezer, but when you do put those things together, everything comes together. It is an amazing feeling, one that I think you will not regret. So good luck, and see you next time.